So, you want to learn 2D frame-by-frame animation, right? Well, excellent choice, since this is a really fun, non-time-consuming, easy, and rewarding hobby. Well, I lied. Except for the rewarding part, it is pretty rewarding watching your finished product back-to-back. However, it is definitely not as easy peasy as it may look once you try it out for the first time. Well, don't you worry, you are in luck, because I am here to show you some ways to get started with 2D animations. And if you already have experience animating, I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks on how to make your animations even better. For this tutorial, I will be mostly demonstrating on a short film I recently animated named If I Could Fly. So, without further ado, let's start animating. If you're just getting started with animation, you need something to start off with. Like, what do you want to animate? What do you want the characters to do? And how will everything move? All these things may be pretty confusing and a bit intimidating at first. Well, as in most creative product, it is always important to start off with references. For animation, videos and visual movement are the best tools. Study animated and live-action movies, paying close attention to the motion and the intent behind each movement. A fantastic resource for beginners is the Animator Survival Kit, a book that explains the 12 principles of animation, which at this point you've probably heard of already. For a quicker introduction, however, I highly recommend BAM Animation's video, which covers 4 of the most important principles in a clear and engaging way. It has been extremely helpful for me as well, and has inspired me to make the tutorial even better, so I will be discussing some of these principles as well. So don't forget, watch a lot of tutorials, look at the movement, and learn little by little. There are 2 methods of animating, pose-to-pose and straight-ahead. Pose-to-pose animation involves creating the keyframes, typically the first, last, and sometimes a middle frame, before filling in the in-between frames to complete the motion. With straight-ahead, you just animate as you go, without really knowing where your animation will end up in. Now, there are benefits to both these methods. Pose-to-pose animation helps you stay consistent by ensuring the final frame matches the size and shape of the first frame, while straight-ahead animation offers more creative freedom. It is important to know when and where to use which method. Pose-to-pose animation is generally better for most movement sequences because it allows you to plan ahead, knowing exactly where the object or character will end up in the final frames. Once the key poses are established, you can fill in the in-betweens to complete the animation. On the other hand, straight-ahead animation is better suited for unpredictable actions, like particles such as fire. I personally also use straight-ahead animation when animating a character moving off-screen. Like here, for example. The ease-in and ease-out principle is crucial for controlling the speed of a moving object by adjusting the spacing between the frames. When an object moves quickly, the spacing between the frames is larger. When it moves slowly, the spacing is smaller, all while maintaining the same frame rate. By combining ease-in, gradual acceleration, and ease-out, gradual deceleration, you can create a natural and realistic effect of an object moving. In this scene, for example, the cat is gliding through the air in this path right here. Notice how when it flies down in the direction of the ground, the frames are more spaced, giving the illusion of the cat going at full speed at this part and slowing down once it reaches the endpoints. Over-exaggerating the motion, otherwise called squashing and stretching, will make the animation a lot more visually interesting. Depending on how extreme you want your animation to be, do it more or less, but it definitely makes it more dynamic and cartoony. Here I animated a ball bouncing up and down without squash and stretch, and here with squash and stretch. Notice how the one without it looks a lot more dull and boring compared to the other one? Well, this also applies to stylized characters. Just squash them a little bit when they come to an abrupt stop, for example, or stretch them if they are moving somewhere with a lot of speed. Okay, this one is probably my personal favorite tip, because it has helped me so much making my animations appear smoother and a lot more natural. So why don't I just show you this principle with an example, instead of just telling you what it is. Right here you can see just a little animation. It looks okay, but something looks a bit off. It's not natural enough, it looks a bit robotic. But here's the same animation with just 2 more frames, one at the beginning and one at the end. See the difference? Nothing that's organic or alive comes to a perfect stop, so overshooting to make the stop decelerate a bit makes your animation look a lot more realistic. And at the beginning, imagine it being like a wind-up. The character is getting ready to move, then it moves. Another tip from me, try tracing the final frame once more, almost identical to the one before it. This technique helps the stopping point feel much more precise and intentional. If at some point you want to try and animate something you don't really have a specific reference for, or you're just interested in how and why exactly this movement is the way it is, knowing physics and different kinds of forces can help you a lot. Let's look at this flying cat animation, for example. It looks like a pretty accurate flight movement, but why do the wings move the way they do? Well, let's take a look at the wings. The upper part of the wing is more stiff since it's directly connected to the body, while the lower part is more flexible. If the upper part moves downwards, the lower parts will fall behind a little bit due to the force of wind. Notice how in this frame, the force of the wind is coming from here, while in this one, it's coming from the opposite direction. So it's really important to keep that motion and knowing that the wings are pushing against another force, which in this case is the wind. And it's not just the wings that are pushing against a force, the cat itself is also being pushed upwards if the wings are flopping downwards. I mean, that after all is how flying works for birds or whatever kind of animal flies. Here is the same technique applied from a different angle by the YouTuber Kazillion, who has helped me a lot learning how to animate flight, wings, and other things, and also explaining very well how everything works, so be sure to check out her video as well. The lower part of the wing is colored red, while the upper part is colored blue, so it's easier to understand the movement and the way this technique is applied from another angle. Alright, so now that you've heard all of these principles and lessons, we can start doing your first animation, which is a ball bouncing. Yeah, I know, every animator tells you to start off with this simple ball, and it gets old, but it really is the best way to get started with animating overall, because it combines all these principles I've mentioned. And to make it a bit more interesting, we are going to turn this boring bouncing ball into a little frog animation in the end. So let's go through with all the steps. We want to start off with the ball in the air. It's going to keep its default shape at first, since we haven't really moved it yet or stretched it, and no outer force has been applied to the ball yet. The next few frames are going to be 2 overshooting frames slightly above the first one with little space between them, since the movement is decelerating because the ball has reached the highest point, and it's about to go in the opposite direction due to the gravitation force. Now we can start the falling process. The ball is being pulled down by gravity and it's going to be stretched vertically with a larger spacing between the frames before and the one after, since it's going to be the fastest motion of the animation. Once the ball hits the ground, the force of the floor is stopping it from going lower, and since it's a squishy ball, it must be squashed on the floor before going to the next frames. This is going to be the most squashing of the ball since it's the spot where it's the lowest. After this, the ball is going to start bouncing up again, so with little spacing, the next few frames will be the ball slowly getting back into default position from the squashing until it goes up again, which is going to stretch upwards once again before going back into the start position. Keep in mind this animation must loop smoothly, so don't forget to have the onion skin for the starting frame open once you do the final frame. So there you go! Ball bounce! Easy peasy! Now let's turn it into a little squishy frog. Let's add his legs and little face and make him bounce. As the frog is moving upwards, the legs are being dragged behind. So keep them pretty low until you get to the highest point. Once you've reached that and are at the part where the ball stretches in the middle, the wind from below is pushing the legs and the face of the frog upwards. So let's just draw it sorta like this. Looks a little weird, I know, but just trust the process. Once it reaches the ground, however, the face and legs drop down on the floor, getting ready to bounce up again. I decided I will not make a frog jumping animation, but rather a frog bouncing up and down animation because I thought it would look more cute and unique. Once it is bouncing up, the legs are falling behind once again, as the frog is hopping upwards. I made the arms facing upwards a little bit, so it's like the frog pushed itself off the ground again to bounce once more. And again, don't forget to make sure the last frame connects smoothly to the first one, so we have a nice loop. And there you have it! A frog bouncing animation made with the help of the ball bounce, which is a perfect start on your animation journey. Another thing to know is what frame rate to use and which frame rate applies best for the kind of animation you are doing. The most common frame rate in movies is 24 frames per second. However, depending on what you want to animate and how many frames you want to be using, you can use more or less. For example, I made this short film using only 11 frames per second, and the movement still looks nice and natural. Of course, while animating and looking back at it, I tried different types of frame rates, but I figured out that 11 frames per second works best for my style of animation since it's more stylized and cartoony, and I'm able to use less frames without making it look unnatural and less smooth. If I would have used 24 frames per second, I would have definitely had to add a lot more frames, and yes, it would have been a lot more smoother, but it would have gotten to a point where I personally would say it's too smooth, to a point where it takes away the cartoony style of it. So I decided to use less than that. However, for you, you just have to try and see which one is best for your own style of animation. And as mentioned before, the most common used frame rate for professional animated movies is between 12 and 24 frames per second. So try that and see how it goes. But if it doesn't work out for you, you can also try less, try more. Just experiment a lot with frames. As I did the same thing, and it worked out in the end. Keep in mind that some animes use only between 8 and 12 frames per second, so everything could work with the fitting art and animation style. This is probably the most important thing you have to keep in mind when animating. Animating can take a lot of time, so never rush to get it done fast. Take as much time as you can so you can make it good. And if it's not good on the first try, try again until it's perfect. Also, never forget to practice, especially if you want to animate something you haven't animated before. But don't forget to use references. If you're planning a full film with some new movements, practice those movements on a separate little loop animation first before doing it into your actual project to see how it looks like and in what way it is made. If you make mistakes there, just keep practicing until it looks good for you, and after which you can finally animate it into your project. Here, for example, I animated this little bird flying loop since it was my first time animating wings from the front, and as I noticed it looks good, I was ready to animate the same movements on my character in my project. Or in this scene, I had to animate it twice because the first attempt looked terrible. Here's the first attempt. I realized, doesn't look that good, doesn't look that natural, so I did attempt 2, which looks quite better, in my opinion at least. Okay, so this one's not really a lesson, but it's important to know what programs to use for animating. While there are a variety of different programs to use, in my personal opinion, the best ones are the ones where you can do both draw and edit and make your keyframes in the same program, like Adobe Animate or Procreate Dreams. Back in the day, I used to use Photoshop to draw all my frames and then drag all of them one by one in Sony Vegas, which I used to edit and put the animation together and this and that. So I was using 2 different programs to do my animation. I mean, it did work out alright. However, it was a bit risky since, for example, if I would have seen a mistake, I would have to go back into my drawing program like Photoshop, find the one frame that looks wrong, then lowering the opacity on the onion skins around it, and then once I fixed it, I would have to drag it back into Sony Vegas and then see once again if it still looks weird or if I fixed it. And all of this can get pretty confusing if you only put your frames in the editing software after you've made your animation. I mean, you can do it while you're animating, but then again, if you find a mistake, you have to switch from one program to the other, which, in my opinion, is not that nice. That's why I would recommend, for beginners especially, would be to use just one program where you can do everything to get your animation done. The one I would recommend most would probably be Adobe Animate, and here is a tutorial by Webs4Fs on the program, going through every useful tool that a lot of other animating programs don't really have. For example, there are easing options, which don't require you to animate the easing principle manually. He also goes through how to use the keyframes and how to get them the perfect loop, and doing overall tweeting animations, which is really helpful starting out. But Adobe Animate isn't the only program you can use. There are tons that are really great for this stuff. So, there you have it. I really hope this tutorial helped you get started with 2D animation, and I hope you have a lot of fun doing it. Of course, you probably won't be able to make perfect Disney-level movies from the start, but with enough time and practice, bit by bit, you might just someday get there. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!